Barabbas, the name that appears in all four Gospels and that none of the four develop. The man who appears for one moment and then disappears, and the most precise symbol of what salvation means for any human being. The name Barabbas in Aramaic means son of the Father. Bar is son, Abbas is father. The Son of the Father released in place of the Son of the Father. The irony of the names that the text preserves without any of the four evangelists commenting on it. This irony of the name is also the deepest in all the Passion narrative. The one called Son of the Father was released, and the one who was the Son of the Father was crucified. The name without the title received what the title without the name fully deserved. All four Gospels mention Barabbas. Only John 18 adds the most important detail of his story. Now Barabbas was a robber. Mark 15:7 adds, "And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas." Barabbas was not a minor criminal. He was a violent insurgent, a man who had killed in the context of a revolt against Rome. The criminal the crowd chose to release instead of the innocent man Pilate found guilty of nothing. The custom of releasing a prisoner at Passover that Pilate mentions is historically debated. Roman records outside the New Testament do not document it with certainty, but the Gospels record it consistently. It was customary to release a prisoner at Passover, and Pilate said, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" The question that summarizes all of human history. Who do you want to be free? The guilty or the innocent? The one who killed or the one who healed? The one who took lives or the one who gave them back? The crowd answered, Barabbas. Not with doubt, not with visible deliberation, with the clarity and speed of those who have been persuaded. The chief priests had persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and for Jesus to be crucified. And Pilate said, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" And they all said, "Let him be crucified." And Pilate said, "Why? What evil has he done?" And they cried out all the more, "Let him be crucified." Logic abandoned. Evidence ignored. The verdict repeated more loudly when reason asked the question. And Pilate washed his hands and said, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." And the crowd voluntarily assumed responsibility for the blood of the innocent. And he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. The briefest text about the most significant exchange in human history. Barabbas released, Jesus delivered. The guilty free, the innocent condemned. What did Barabbas think when they opened the door of his cell? Did he know? Did he find out afterward? Did he see the crucifixion? The text says nothing. Barabbas disappears from the narrative after the verse that releases him. His story after the liberation is the silence of the text about what he did with the freedom he did not deserve. This silence about Barabbas after the release is also the most uncomfortable mirror for any believer. What did you do with the freedom you did not deserve? The question the substitution asks of any beneficiary of grace who received what they did not earn. Because that is what Barabbas received. The freedom he did not earn. The life he did not deserve. The opening of the cell door because another took what was rightfully his. The substitute who took what belonged to him so that he could receive what belonged to the substitute. This substitution of Barabbas is also the most concrete image of the vicarious atonement that Christian theology describes. The innocent in place of the guilty. The one who had no debt, paying the debt of the one who did. The one who did not deserve the condemnation, receiving it, so that the one who did deserve it would not receive it. The name of any believer could have been Barabbas that morning. Any human being who recognizes their condition. The one who deserved the condemnation. The one who was released not because they were innocent, but because another took their place. This personal identification with Barabbas is what the story most demands of the mature believer. Not identification with Pilate, who looked for escape routes. Not with the crowd that yielded to pressure. With Barabbas, the one who was in the cell, the one who was released without deserving it. That is you. And the one who recognizes they are Barabbas also has Barabbas's question. What do I do with this freedom I did not earn? What does the one who was released for free do with the life that was returned to him without any personal merit justifying it? The answer of the gospel to that question is the answer that the life of the released must demonstrate. The one who was released from the cell they deserved cannot live as if the release were their own. They cannot live as if there had been no exchange. They cannot ignore the cross that was raised in the place where they should have stood. The Barabbas who left the cell that morning and who passed on the road to Calvary saw the cross that bore another's name. He saw the one who died where he should have died. And that sight, if Barabbas had eyes to see it, was the most powerful image of grace that any human being can witness. The grace that Barabbas received without words, without theology, without doctrine, simply with the opening of the door of the cell, is also the grace that any believer receives. The opening of the door we deserved to remain closed because another took what was rightfully ours. For the mature believer of 40 or 50 or 60 years who has spent decades inside the faith, the story of Barabbas is the invitation to the most uncomfortable return to the foundations. I am free because another took my place. This truth of the exchange that Barabbas represents is also the truth that communion commemorates, the body and blood of the one who took Barabbas's place on the cross of Calvary. Every time the believer takes the bread and the wine, they are repeating what Barabbas experienced without words, the freedom that cost another's life. And the question that the silence of the text about Barabbas after the release asks of every generation of believers. The cell door was opened, the cross was raised, and the one who was released has the life of the released to answer that question with every day they live. Live as the released one, not as the one who forgot who was in the cell and why they came out. That is Barabbas. That is you. That is me. That is Barabbas, the Son of the Father, released in place of the Son of the Father, the most concrete image of the gospel in a single exchange, and the mirror that any believer who looks at it honestly will see their own face in. There is an important textual tradition about the name of Barabbas. In some ancient manuscripts of Matthew's Gospel, the complete name that appears is Jesus Barabbas. If that reading is authentic, then Pilate asked, "Whom do you want me to release for you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called Christ?" This possible coincidence of the name would make the contrast even more dramatic. Two men named Jesus, the Jesus, Son of the Father, who was guilty, the Jesus, Son of the Father, who was innocent. The crowd choosing between the two Jesuses and choosing the wrong one in the deepest possible sense. Although the Jesus Barabbas reading is in some important manuscripts and was known to Origen in the 3rd century, later manuscripts removed the first name, perhaps, as Origen suggested, out of reverence for the name Jesus. Humanity wanting to clean up history without understanding that the discomfort was precisely the point. The point is that grace is uncomfortable, that the substitution is disturbing, that the exchange that produced salvation is not something that well-trained religious sensibility can accept without some scandal. The scandal of grace that releases the one who does not deserve to be released. For the mature believer who has spent decades in the faith and who sometimes feels that grace has become too familiar, the story of Barabbas is the most direct restoration of the original scandal. It releases the Barabbas from the cell he deserved, and it does so by sending the innocent to the cross of the guilty. The scandal does not soften with the years, it deepens. The one who has spent more decades in the faith should find the exchange more disturbing, not less. The familiarity that produces insensitivity to the scandal is also the signal that the story of Barabbas needs to be reread. Reread it today with the eyes of honesty about what you deserve, with the awareness of what was in the cell before the door was opened, and with the renewed scandal that the one who opened the door went to the cross of the one who should have remained inside. The Gospel also tells us something about the crowd that asked for Barabbas. It was not a perverse crowd in the ordinary sense. It was a manipulated crowd. The chief priests had persuaded them. Fear and social pressure and the influence of religious leaders produced the verdict that none of the individuals in the crowd would have produced alone on a quiet morning. This dynamic of the manipulated crowd that produces the wrong verdict is also one of the most important teachings about social psychology that the text preserves. Groups can be led to decisions that no individual would make alone when pressure, fear, and the influence of authority combine appropriately. For the mature believer who has lived in communities where group pressure produced wrong verdicts, the story of the crowd that asked for Barabbas offers the most uncomfortable perspective. Group pressure can produce in any community the verdict that no individual would produce alone. The antidote that the text does not offer as such, but that the story suggests, is also the antidote that requires the most courage. The individual who on the morning at the praetorium asks, "What evil has he done?" when everyone else is shouting, "Crucify him." The voice that asks what the crowd does not want to answer is also the most difficult voice to exercise in any community. But it is the voice the text honors in Pilate himself, even though Pilate ultimately yielded. Ask the question, even if the crowd shouts more loudly when you ask it, even if the pressure is enough for Pilate to wash his hands. The question, "What evil has he done?" remains the right question when the crowd has decided and the decision is wrong. That is Barabbas, the Son of the Father released by the Son of the Father, the criminal freed by the condemnation of the innocent, the mirror of any human being who understands what was in the cell. And the question that the silence of the text after the release leaves for any generation that reads it: what are you doing with the freedom you did not earn? The cross was raised in the place where Barabbas should have stood. Every time a believer looks at the cross, Barabbas's eyes can see it. That should have been me. That is the foundation of genuine gratitude. Not how good that Jesus died, but that was my place, and he took it. The scandal of substitution becomes the fuel of love. The released prisoner who forgets who was in the cell lives as if the release were their own achievement. That is not the life of Barabbas. That is not the life of grace. The life of Barabbas, if his eyes were open, is the life of permanent astonishment. I am free. I should not be. Another stood where I should have stood. That astonishment does not diminish with time. It deepens. The longer you have been free, the more you understand what the freedom cost. For the mature believer who has been walking in grace for decades, the story of Barabbas is the restoration of the original astonishment that familiarity can erode. Go back to the cell. Remember who was in it. Remember what the charge was. Remember that the door opened not because you were declared innocent, but because another was declared guilty in your place. That is the gospel in its most concrete form. Not doctrine, but drama. Not theology, but exchange. The guilty released, the innocent condemned. The cell door opened. Barabbas walked out of the cell and into freedom. What he did with the rest of that day and the rest of his life is the silence that the text leaves for you to fill. What do you do with the freedom you did not earn? What do you do with the days and years that belong to you only because another took what was yours? That question is the most important question Barabbas' story leaves open. It is also the most important question your story must answer. Live as the released, not as the one who forgot the cell, not as the one who thinks the freedom was always his, as the one who was released because another was condemned. Every day you live is a day that cost the death of the innocent one. Every breath is a breath that another's last breath made possible. That is Barabbas' reality. That is also yours if you have received the grace that releases the guilty in exchange for the condemnation of the innocent. If you have been Barabbas at the praetorium, you have been. The name could have been yours that morning. The crowd could have asked for you. The cross could have been yours. And yet, you are free. Live accordingly, with the astonishment of the released, with the gratitude of the one who knows the exchange, with the generosity of the one who received everything without merit. The life of Barabbas after the praetorium is your life. The question he never answers in the text is the question your life must answer every day. What are you doing with the freedom you did not earn? That is Barabbas. That is you. That is the gospel in its most uncomfortable and most transforming form. The Son of the Father, released by the Son of the Father. The name without the title received what the title without the name fully deserved. That exchange is your life. Live it with everything it implies, with the cross visible, with the cell remembered, with the name of the one who took your place never forgotten. That is Barabbas. That is you. That is me. That is the grace that opens doors that should stay closed forever. And that is the life that grace makes possible in exchange. The door is open. The cross is standing. The cell is empty. You are free. Live as the freed. That is the only appropriate response to what happened at the Praetorium. That is Barabbas, son of the Father, released by the Son of the Father. The most concrete image of the gospel in history. The mirror in which every believer sees their own face.